Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and enjoying another week of chaos and fun for fantasy footy coaches. We're just over a handful of weeks left to go in your 2023 season, but don't you worry, this week has thrown us some curveballs, hasn't it? And we're going to help you with another strategy roundtable. Joining me on this episode, as he has right throughout this season proper and the pre-season, MiniMonk. Hello, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not going too badly. It's going to be a very interesting week with all the carnage that we've already had so far.
Yeah, and at time of recording and time of release, we've only got a couple of squads that have been named and known to us. So Thursday night is going to be very, very critical. Right throughout these podcasts during the season, often across the strategy roundtable, you've had MiniMonk, you've had Louis, you've had Kane, you've had Rids. Thought we'd do something a little bit different and just go a little pre-season on you and just have a one-on-one conversation with certainly one of the best minds in fantasy footy at the moment in MiniMonk. I'm not speaking about myself in the third person, just to be very clear on that. And good news, no Brad Crouch to come up on this podcast too, outside of that reference.
You just had it.
I just had it. It's
you
fine.
Just mentioned him.
It's the Braden Bruce. It's fine. Lots to get through on this podcast. I want to talk about captaincy and vice captaincies and the considerations we need to have over these next couple of weeks. I want to talk about how we create separation in our sides. I want to talk SuperCoach and DreamTeam as well for us about how we manage the Josh Dunkley situation, and also want to talk about the carnage we've had. But I've been made a liar, MiniMonk, not just because I said I wouldn't talk about Brad Crouch and we started with him. I said, let's just have a nice conversation, just you and I, like the preseason. And then fellow co-founder Ridley United strolls on in just in the nick of time. Full Dustin Martin in a grand final, just when you think it's going. Rids, hello, mate. How are you?
Hey, how you going, mate?
I'm good, mate. If you haven't figured out, the podcast is on. But I want to talk about the carnage, boys, that we've both noticed and slightly partly excited about that we've got as a community. Jake Lloyd owners knew there was some level of carnage coming with that concussion. So knowing he was out is not an unknown quantity, but just in the last 24 hours, clubs have confirmed, and there is still some innuendo about some other players to come, but already confirmed to us out this week is Caleb Sarong with that suspension. Rightly or wrongly in people's eyes, he's out. Josh Dunkley, I don't think anyone's shocked to see him get another week to get that calf right, but I do want to talk about him in a moment. Bailey Smith came out saying he was a bit unwell, according to the club last week. Maybe that gives a little bit of grace for an underwhelming performance last week. He's out. Hayden Young is out, which isn't hugely impactful across the formats, but it's there enough to create some pain. Angus Sheldrick is now out with no definitive time frame of when he's going to be moved on. So maybe we need to unpack that one a little bit. And there's also been some alluding to the fact that guys like a Darcy Cameron, amongst others, might not yet get up. Again, that's not confirmed, but those other 5 boys are. So MiniMonk, maybe we'll start with you and then Rids will come back. When we have a carnage round like this, you combine that many popular names and skinny benches that are filled with red dots for a lot of them. How the heck do we approach this week of fantasy footy?
Carnage weeks are a lot of fun and they can be an absolute mess because you're looking everywhere. You're looking at what can you do with all of the different players and all the different options you have associated with those players. And I think the best place to start when it comes to these sorts of situations is who are the players that I have a more definitive timeline on and who are the players that I have a more unknown timeline on. And then who are the players who are likely to be in my team at the end of the season and who are the players that are not. So if we start with the definitive timeline,
sure,
we know that Caleb Sarong is only going to miss the one game.
And he's not injured.
1 week suspension. He's not injured. Another definitive timeline was probably Jake Lloyd. It's a concussion. They played their first game. They played the first game last week on the Thursday night. They play, I think, on the Saturday next weekend. It's 16 days. The typical concussion recovery timeline is 12 to 14 days. He should play.
Yes.
But then we start to go the likes of Hayden Young, Josh Dunkley, and Angus Sheldrick. Well, Sheldrick has been said he's not been all right because of his ankle, which he looked sore in the game on Thursday night about. The fact that it's taken this long for the club to come out is a bit hard, but he's also a rookie. He's done his job. He's made a lot of cash. I think you can move him on pretty easily. Hayden Young, he's a bit of a trickier one. The quote I think from him specifically was that he feels like he'll come back at some point later in the season, but that's very vague. That could be next week. It could be in a month's time.
And Fremantle are fighting an uphill battle to make finals at the best of times. So putting him in any sort of duress or risk, barring a nice month of footy, we might not see him again. That's obviously a little bit of hyperbole there, but that's genuinely an outcome.
Yeah, and I think that's a genuine possibility with someone like Young as well. They want him to be a pretty core cog of their team, and so they're not going to risk him in any reasonable way. I think Dunkley might be the trickiest one, though. And I know Rids wants to talk about Dunkley a bit later as well. The club always said 1 to 2 weeks.
Yep.
I think the quote from Fagan earlier this week was that Dunkley just hasn't progressed quite as much as we'd want him to. Playing on the Friday night, maybe if he was playing on the Saturday or the Sunday, he'd be playing. But again, it's a calf. You don't know what's going to happen. We think it's going to be back next week, but who knows? And let's be real. It's more of a limited trade situation because if you were a holder of Dunkley in AFL Fantasy last week, after seeing probably the score that Sheldrick dropped on the Thursday night, I think majority of people were trading and a majority of people did trade.
Yeah, overall he's got 46% ownership, but you look at the top percentage of coaches, it's considerably lower than that.
But in limited trades, it's a lot more concerning because chances are teams are running very low on trades, especially with a lot of the injury carnage we've had this year. We've had the likes of Mills go down, we've had Miller go down, we've had Stewart go down for stages, Sicily's getting suspended, Oliver. It's been a hard year to manage your trades. When it's someone like Dunkley, who we know is a top 2 forward across the formats, and the club has been pretty forthcoming with regards to any information about him, I'm more inclined to try and hold him if possible, especially in limited trades. And look, if you want to be that person who's taking a bit of a pod move and you still own him in AFL Fantasy and you've avoided a lot of the other carnage, it could be a play to hold him again. But again, AF is probably can trade and get back into him, especially with his break-even being so high.
Yeah, look, it's probably a unique coach that's got bigger fish to fry potentially in terms of those guys that might feel like they're longer than this, maybe one more week. But Rids, let's come to Dream Team and SuperCoach again. The coaches panel, we cover all of these fantasy formats, and I do want to come back to some more carnage conversations in a moment. But talk to me about a coach that is looking at the amount of trades they've got left in their side, whether it be 1, 2, I don't know many more that outside of league-focused coaches have 3 or more. The vast majority of people I know are in that low handful left to go. So where's this time of looking at Dunkley, knowing it could just be one more, it could be very Clayton Oliver-ish, where it just keeps extending out for us? Where should we be making those markers around trading Dunkley in a more limited trade of SuperCoach and Dream Team?
So again, and I know this is the common theme, okay, but it is really team dependent, Radio.
Yeah.
It depends whether you've got a Himmelberg or someone that you can flip from the defence, because then you've got someone like a James Sicily who becomes an option. Is it that you've got a really strong forward sitting in your midfield? Then you can maybe look at a Dunkley into a midfield. But I just with Dunkley, let's look at him wholly specifically with this. I'm just going to read out his next 6 games, okay? Opponents. Okay. It's Melbourne, Geelong, Gold Coast, Fremantle, Adelaide, and Collingwood. Now, the only one that actually really jumps out at me is his last game against St Kilda in round 24. Yeah. So if you've got a lot of trades left, and I'm saying a lot is probably 3 or more.
Yep.
He's got a very high break even anyway. He's got a calf. I think he's absolute trade, okay, at this point in time.
Hmm.
Now, the interesting factor is what I just spoke about a second ago. If you can get a Dunkley to a midfielder or a defender like a Sicily, who's very unique, that people are going to struggle to trade into, that very well becomes an option, with that draw.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they're not the easiest run for inside mids. On top of that, we've already seen him subbed out 2 weeks ago against Richmond. We've missed the West Coast game. You know, there's a couple of friendly matchups that we've sort of missed.
We've missed the Grady game, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the sugar hit that we're talking about, like the potential to go that 150 odd, they're pretty much gone. Now, Dunkley's an extreme beast where even against the good teams, he has the potential to do that, rightio? Because that's the role he plays. He plays that defensive inside. He tackles a lot. He does get a lot of those chip little kicks. It's very hard. This one is really, really hard. But we've seen calves over the last, whatever period, many, many years now, that have dragged from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And even then, when people come back, they just haven't quite been right. So my interest in discussion here in limited trades is what happens if you've only got 1 or 2 trades left and you can't trade back into him? That's the discussion.
Yeah, and does it depend on your focus of league or overall rankings as well, Rids? Is that another element?
No, I think they're actually the same element in this scenario, okay? Because really, you've got to go against, you want to get a unique matchup, okay? Head-to-head player matchup anyway. So trading out of a Dunkley and into a Sicily with a lot of ceiling, for instance, it becomes viable, I mean, really, they're quite comparable on any given day, any given matchup. So if you haven't got a Bontempelli, for instance, again, it's a similar to similar, and it gives you a unique point of difference as you move into your leagues focused for finals, which is not far away now, or it's that unique head-to-head matchup against the top-ranked teams that you might be able to sneak your way in. Because you've got to really, the understanding that I would be having, if you're really, really highly ranked, you'd be very limited on trades right now because that's how you've played it to maintain your ranking, if that makes sense.
Yes.
There's a few, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but that's the discussion. Is I would be thinking that the large majority wouldn't be able to trade into a Sicily type who's coming off a 3-week injury. They might have held him.
Suspension.
3-week suspension.
That's all right.
They may have held him through that suspension. That's very viable, especially with a Wilmot or someone like that doing so well over the last period of time.
Yeah, good shout.
There is a potential there that happened. Himmelberg was cheap. Salem was cheap. There's been a lot of people that have been cheap, across the journey. So there is potential that they've traded into a D7 that's actually covered for Sicily over that period. But you'd like to think that the large majority of the highly ranks don't own him at this point in time in the limited trades. So that's not a bad move if you are trying to get that ranking boost.
Now, MiniMonk, let's talk about Sicily for a second. I think he's one of the most popular names for people that in limited trades that do have targets and do have an avenue, whether it be via a Dunkley using DPP or a D6 that they've not been thrilled with or are happy to see gone. Hayden Young could be a case in point for that. Where's that gap between, we talked about groupthink last week, and certainly there's plenty of understandable excitement amongst the community for why James Sicily's the right guy to get this week. The ceiling is there, the uniqueness is there, and the fixture is there to boot. Can you talk me through a world where taking Sicily on by choice, not by design where you have to, but by choice is a viable play for coaches?
Of course, it's a viable choice. I mean, you only have to look at his price tag to see just how viable of a choice it is. I mean, if we just look at AFL Fantasy, I think he comes in at the third most expensive defender in the game at the moment.
Behind
I think
Dawson
in
and
SuperCoach,
Dacos, yeah.
behind Dawson and Dacos, who, let's be real, they're the number 1 and 2 defender for the year.
Totally.
You can argue on the order, doesn't really matter. They're both fantastic, and this is across formats. But do we have Sicily as the third best defender for the rest of the year? Especially when we've seen the likes of Sinclair come out of the blue. Doherty's returned to form. Stewart's got a fantastic fixture for him to run home and shown just last week how much he can junk it up. We've also got the likes of Caleb Daniel, Liam Duggan, Luke Ryan, who are all showing that they've got ceiling. And, you know, we've seen Sicily get opened up after the last few weeks, and there was the coaches comments, which basically made him think that he is going to be able to play free, but they don't have Blank this week.
Yeah.
He's missing with a concussion. So it'll be interesting to see how they swing their team, and they're probably going to try and develop youth as well. So why not try and develop some players who can play that role and have been playing it pretty well in Sicily's absence, like Seamus Mitchell and Josh Weddle, and even to an extent, Will Day could spend some time rotating between halfback and in the center. And the other thing that I would notice is that, yes, they are playing North Melbourne this week, but people have missed the fact that Stewart was tagged last week as well. There's every potential that that tag goes to James Sicily this week. If he's tagged on his return game back in when he's unique, because let's be real, in limited trades, even coaches in the top 100, top 1,000, you might only get to 10% ownership, if that. AFL Fantasy, I think it'll be a bit different. I think it'll probably be closer to the 30 to 40% marker if people are really targeting him hard, like I think they will. But if that's a unique matchup and he comes into a tag and you're outlaying that much cash for him, it's really, really scary, especially when there's so much more that you can be doing with your team. I mean, the perfect counterexample would be someone like Jack Steele, who in AFL Fantasy is 130K cheaper. Do you really think that James Sicily can out-average Jack Steele for the rest of the season, let alone the cash outlay that you might have to make for that? That's the type of argument that I'd be looking at if you're wanting to take him on, because don't get me wrong, there is a world where Sicily averages 120 across the formats from here until the end of the season.
Unbelievably possible. Yeah.
Because he's got the ceiling to be able to go 140, 150 on his particular day.
No doubt.
And he's got some good matches to be able to do that. But the cash outlay is very, very high. And we don't know what he's going to come back into that team and do exactly. Like, we're pretty confident that he's going to be a halfback. We're pretty confident he's going to play loose. But
yeah,
who knows? Like, they're a rebuilding team. If he was coming back into, I don't know, a Melbourne team or a Brisbane team who are in premiership contention, that's a role he's been playing all year, then by all means, you could have confidence that that's what's going to happen. Same with why people were looking to trade back into Clary Oliver the week that he was coming back from his injury. But with someone like Sicily, who there's all those concerns about, it's a very coin flip decision. I can see the arguments for going for it because of the uniqueness and because of the run, but I can also see the arguments against it because of, in the same way, that uniqueness and the price outlay.
And so, MJ, I just wanted to throw out there, okay? I only use Sicily as an example because he's coming back from his suspension. Now,
correct.
I just want to clear this up a little bit. I would not personally recommend a Dunkley to Sicily because it's a very much an AF type play due to his matchups. Okay. So, and when we look at his matchups, it's between now and the end of the season.
Yeah.
His next 3 weeks are extremely friendly at this point in time for that matchup. Okay. We're talking North Melbourne, Richmond, St Kilda.
Yeah.
Okay. They're pretty much the 3 of the best matchups there could be in the role that he has.
Sure.
But we're looking then at Collingwood, Western Bulldogs, Melbourne, and Fremantle. It's not as friendly, those last 4 games. So in Dream Team and SuperCoach, you're holding him through that.
Yes.
Okay. The 7, not the 3.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of groupthink right now, and it's a great, interesting one after the discussion we had last week. James Sicily probably was always going to be, one of the guys in the groupthinks at this point in time in AFL fantasy, because he's coming back. And
he's been excellent when he has played for the most part this year.
So this is why people have to separate AF to their limited trade formats. Now, earlier in the year, and I know many people did it, like we say it a lot, but many people may not have been able to do that separation. But we had a lot more trades in Dream Team and SuperCoach at that point in the time. So that meant you could actually get it muddled up and everything else. Right now, though, we got 7 weeks to go, and there's a lot. We've already got carnage. Like you only mentioned it, was it 5 players out already? And it's only Wednesday.
Yeah, and that doesn't include a Lloyd who was known before the weekend.
Yeah, exactly right. So what does that mean? Like, we're likely to have a much heavier carnage toll between now and the end of the year, potentially, when teams start getting, knocked out of the finals contention and people get put into cotton wool and do their operations early, like we have seen in years gone by. This tends to happen. So that one trade, with 3 rounds to go, when one of your guys is out, is absolutely amazing. And yourself, like you might not even have cover at that point in time. So you might be potentially covering 110 player with that one trade for 3 weeks or 4 weeks later in the season. That's a lot of points. And that's a lot of rankings.
Yeah, and we could see that as early as this week, that start to impact coaches. So, MiniMonk, let's bring it back full circle to some of this carnage. Everyone's going to be affected to some extent this week across the formats. It's going to be a unique and very lucky coach, and luck certainly is a factor in the game, to have kind of dodged no forced manoeuvring or forced benching of a player, depending on the formats. For a coach that's in the chasing pack, though, this could be just the lucky break they need, isn't it? Like the opportunity to surge past some coaches. Chaos, and carnage, we sometimes have this mindset of, oh no, it's the worst thing in the world to happen to us. But the good news is often we're not alone in that experience.
No, we're not. We're not alone in that experience whatsoever. I mean, it does provide you with that opportunity to be able to diverge from the pack very easily. And we saw that last week with Josh Dunkley. There was a huge divergence in where I'm talking AFL fantasy specifically here, because he was a trade out. But there was a huge divergence in where coaches went and how it went as well. You had players going to Canelio, McRae, Sheasel, Keys.
Butters.
There's a lot to Butters as well. Like people were picking up on top 6 forwards people they thought were top 6 forwards. And if we look at that, the only one who really fired was Canelio. And, it's a 1 week sample size. It's really hard to judge how good a trade was off of 1 week. But the fact that we saw that much divergence leads into the fact that crisis does create the opportunity. We look at someone like Sarong, who I think is 56% owned in the top 100 in AFL fantasy this week.
Yep.
It's very interesting to see how that'll split, because there's a world where Sarong could be a hold. Because if you've copped the likes of Jake Lloyd, Sheldrick, you may have held Dunkley, you might get another premium who's dropped later. Well, then you know that Sarong is back in a week's time, and he's done nothing to prove to you as to why he shouldn't be a top 8 midfielder. He hasn't gone under 100 in, 16 or 12 weeks or something. It's crazy how consistent.
So barring round 1, he's given you nothing to be disappointed by, and even then, you'll take a high 80s given the tag.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just looking at it. He's had 2 sub 100 games aside from that round 1 game.
Yeah.
And they were against Brisbane and Hawthorn, and they were a 94 and a 97.
It's amazing.
He's a top 8 midfielder. Pure and simple, he's a top 8 midfielder, especially with that sort of consistency. And his teammate Andy Brayshaw is probably a top 8 midfielder as well. But you're looking for where you can get to that top of the line and where you get the differentiation. So if there's a world where you can hold Sarong and have him as a unique come next week, whilst not sacrificing that much on your own field scoring, then that's another thing you need to look at. If you can trade him and get into another top 8 midfielder and do an upgrade somewhere else in your team, that's also a viable option. You know, we've got the resurgence of someone like Jack Steele, who's come back and looks bloody good. We've got Callum Mills, who's coming in very cheaply. Now, he's a bit of a risky one to go to with the Lloyd concussion, but
sure,
he's worth having the conversation about because of how cheap he is, and he can facilitate an upgrade on the other end. But it's about the process. It's about looking at these options, because if you're trading him, who are you trading him to? And what are you doing with that second trade? If you're trying to cash in Sheldrick this week because he's not playing anymore, well, you cash in Sheldrick down to a 250k player in AFL Fantasy. You're trading Sarong. You're going to have a lot of cash for next week. What are you going to do with it? Can you do something else on the other end? Do you have a Johnson lying around that you can trade up? Do you have a Ben Hobbs that you'd rather take up to a top 8 midfielder, or top 8 forward, top 6 forward? Getting all over the shop, but you know what I mean.
A top forward. Let's go with that.
A top forward. There are a lot of different options that you have available to you, and it's never as simple as just looking at the players that have a red dot next to the name and saying, I've got to trade that player this week. Yeah. It's about looking at where your team is going to be in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, because as I've said, if you've got Sarong as unique in 3 weeks' time, that's a really good spot. It's like people who are going to have Sicily as unique this week, or when Dunkley comes back, you're going to trade into him the week he comes back, you're going to wait. These are the coin flip decisions that you can get separation from top coaches on, because most teams are getting close towards a completed team.
Yep.
And that's when separation can start to happen, because, you know, people might be of the view, oh, there's a top 6 forwards, but there's not. There might be a top 6 defenders, but there might not really be. And then in the top 8 midfielders, I mean, it's an open field. It's impossible almost to predict who's going to be in that 5 to 15 slot and what order they're going to fit in. So that's where you can create separation and differentiation from the rest of the pack.
So MJ, just on Sarong in AF, if you are trading out of him, you have to be exploring trading back into him later in the season, because 2 of his last 3 matchups are very, very friendly. He's got West Coast in round 22, and he's got Hawthorn in round 24. Now, I know there's a Finn McGuinness discussion that's going to happen at some stage, but the reality is, like, they're 2 friendly matchups, okay? Do you really want to be in that unique head-to-head matchup at the other side of not owning him?
After being with him for big chunks of the year, most likely for owners,
Yeah, so that's where the appetite and having a plan to get back into him at some stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's good. Sorry, I cut you off. I had a question, but is there anything else you wanted to hit on Sarong there?
I just wanted to highlight a couple of other matchups, though, in that last 7 games, okay? Sydney, Geelong, Brisbane, there's a Collingwood. Unfortunately, he misses Collingwood, which would be a friendlier matchup this week. That's very unfortunate for all that own him. But he's also got a Port Adelaide in that run too. So you just got to be planning how it looks week to week over the next 7 weeks and being adaptable and working through it, okay?
Yeah.
So if you're chasing a car, if you're chasing whatever, a hat, whatever you're chasing, just look through every option.
Yeah, it's good advice. MiniMonk?
I will just say quickly on Sarong, and yes, those matchups, there's a mixture of really good ones in the in the West Coast and Hawthorn ones. There's a mixture of some iffy ones with the Port Adelaide and, you know, Sydney matchups. But he also has just played Carlton, who are the toughest matchup for inside mids. Freo got decimated on the weekend, absolutely torn to shreds, and he still found a way to ton.
It's true.
So if you've got a player who's in your team, and even in the worst case scenario, they hit a ton, you're taking that to the bank every day of the week, because we've seen, you know, someone like Tim Taranto's tunned all the entire season and then puts up back-to-back non-tons. It's very hard to find players that have that consistency.
Yeah,
it's on Tim Taranto. I think it's about time we have a discussion about Tim Taranto.
I wanted to ask you about him, because this Richmond midfield dynamic has changed pretty significantly over the past fortnight.
Yeah, but I mean, people are still just going to him as if Hopper's not playing. Like there is. Well, don't worry about Prestia for now. Let's just say Hopper.
Sure.
Because it is hand in hand. They were both recruited to Richmond to play an inside mid role. Like, no wonder Taranto had that pop with no hopper, and it's not so much his ability to have those ceiling games, it's the frequency of the ceiling games. That was the biggest one. So having someone like a hopper there that's taken a lot of the contested ball, a lot of the focus, like, it means Taranto potentially could move a little bit more forward. Guys like Dustin Martin can roll through. Shy Bolton can run through. And now we look at Prestia. We haven't even discussed Prestia. So there's a lot of dynamics happening in that Richmond midfield that people haven't adjusted to. Yeah, you go.
He's an interesting one because, as you said, it lines up with the Hopper and Prestia injuries. He's run from round 7 to round 14 where he went off the chain. Hopper wasn't playing. And this is probably one for people to get your notebooks out, scrub that down, write that down for next year, because if Hopper and Prestia are both fit, Taranto is a pretty good player, but he's probably overpriced on what he would do.
Yeah.
And that just rules him out of AF starting squad straight away next year as a mid only.
Agreed.
So there's your handy hint for next year. If you play AF, scrub Taranto off your list right now next year if Hopper and Prestia are playing.
So there's a couple of midfielders that, again, predominantly AF, but certainly SuperCoaches and Dream Teamers might be looking at as well, whether it be a combination of trades or whether they're just trying to assemble some small bits of dollars they can to get a guy that's got potential over the next month and a bit to score in the vicinity of a top tier, predominantly midfielder, I'd like to highlight for now. There's probably 3 that are, and maybe you could argue 4, but I'll say 3. I'll discount Tuke Miller because there's so much unknowns about Gold Coast now, and Dew did like playing him off half forward. So we'll put Miller as an unknown quantity because we need to see what Stephen King does. But Jack Steele, definitely his best game of the year, moved the best he had. How does he come back after that? Is he fully back, or was it just... We don't know. But so Steele, I want to have a conversation about in a second. Callum Mills, really nice first quarter, solid second, quite quiet third, and then just a blitzkrieg in that last quarter and was everywhere. It was back to what people that have owned Callum Mills prior to this year know he can be and why he was a 110 scorer. The other probably is a Luke Davies-Uniacke. We alluded last week to the North Melbourne fixture, and in a pretty tough matchup, did well. A couple of goals obviously helped, but 120s across the formats. So, boys, my question is, I know they're all priced different, their break-evens are different, there's a lot of difference there. Do you have a preference of that trio of potential premium mids that all have some value attached to them?
Yeah, I think I do. And I think it's also because of the matchups and circumstances of their team. But I think that if you're going to one this week, it's Jack Steele. And I know that he's the priciest of the 3, and that makes it very hard, but he's also got the lowest break even of the 3. And he's also the one that's popped the biggest score of the 3. And he's also the one that has the potential to be a top 2 mid, not just a top 8 mid. And he looked really, really good in his game on the weekend. But you know what we saw that we haven't seen for a long time? His contest-to-contest run and his ability to spread for the cheaper ball.
Yeah.
He got involved. He had 12 tackles at the contest and 6 marks in that game as well. He was bloody good.
That's old Steele right there.
That is old Steele. Combining for nearly 20 tackles and marks in a game, that's top tier. And that's why he pushed, 150 across the formats nearly. But the thing is, the reason why I'm more invested in Steele compared to the other 2 is because the other 2 have things going against them this week. Mills looked great. Mills can be a top 8 midfielder, but you need to see it when Lloyd is back. And Lloyd's missing this week with a concussion. Mills isn't going to go up that much in price. If we see that they still play him in the midfield this week, at his price tag, you jump on. And LDU, there's just the tag concern this week. We saw it last week
McGuinness.
with McGuinness against Hawthorn. You know who else tagged? Nash. If they're going to send a big body to LDU, who are they going to send to him? They're probably going to send Nash. Sam Mitchell is not afraid to try and slow down one of the more prolific ball users in the teams that he's facing. And LDU is basically going to be that player with the fact that Simpkin is out. And they just don't have the bigger bodies in the midfield. LDU is going to be unprotected. But after that, the run opens up.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that you can do with those two after that. So this week, steal, assess the other two for another week, and then look to them next week.
So, MJ, I just want to talk to Mills for 1 second.
Yeah, please.
Now, Lloyd got knocked out in the second quarter.
Very early in it too, by the way.
Yep. He was on fire, rightio.
Yes.
Now, what happened then was there was slight adjustments in game, whether it came from the coach or whether it came from the player. Who knows what happened?
Francis was the sub too, which is, from a Sydney perspective, probably one of the more helpful coverages that could have come on.
Yeah, but not from a quick half-back perspective. That's a tall half-back. Now, if it was a Robbie Fox coming on, then potentially. What we saw, though, was Sydney started to struggle in the game. So Mills went back to try and, let's say, stop the momentum shifting to the opposition, okay, at that stage when the game was on. Now, when the game, after the third quarter, we saw him go into half-back, and we saw him playing very behind the ball in the third quarter.
Yes.
What happened, though, was when Sydney chased that game, we saw Mills in the middle. We saw Mills trying to win the game of football for Sydney. Now, however you look at it, there's worries, okay, risk around both of that scenario. But the fact is, you should have some sort of confidence that they will bring in someone to replace Lloyd at this point in time this week.
For sure.
Okay. And you should have some sort of confidence that Mills will be midfield to start the game. The problem is what happens after the start and between the quarters, whether Mills goes back, whether the coach sends him back, whatever the discussion is, I would still be very confident he's going to be playing predominantly mid. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about with Callum Mills, that was a weird game by Champion Data, I don't know about you, but we actually had comments, and I'm pretty sure in our group chat, we actually said we were expecting Mills to actually get a couple of tackles that was potentially missed at the end of the game, and they removed another 5 points off him post end of siren. I reckon that was closer to 110 game with him spending a quarter in the back line.
Yeah, rather than a mid-90s game, yeah.
Yeah, it was a weird scoring game. If people ever have the opportunity to go back and replay, just have a look. There was a lot of half tackles, a lot of half opportunities where his teammates missed him, but he was running open.
Right there, yeah.
He was all the time he was there, and it was only that third quarter he disappeared out of the view a lot when he was playing behind the ball. So it was a bizarre game. It really was a bizarre game. But there is concern. There is risk.
Yeah.
He's priced, though, as we've said many times over already, he's priced to better that risk.
Yes. Yeah. You're not paying for him at his 110 price point. You're paying for him nearly 40 points per game cheaper than that.
100%.
From what he's done. So before we wrap up this episode, a little bit of a shorter, sharper one as we head towards the start of the round. There's one thing over these next 5 minutes I want to get your lads' thoughts on before we wrap up. And it's this idea of when and how we get uniques in our side. There's probably 2 key ways to do it. One is around the captain and vice captain selections that we make. And Rids, I'm keen on your take on that in a second. And MiniMonk, the other, is about the type of player we trade into or arguably out of in the one in the same. And so maybe let's start there. Again, AFL Fantasy, it's much more likely that you have the trades available to you with the 2 a week, use it or lose. to use a strategic separation point in SuperCoach and DreamTeam. Unless you're focused on leagues, you're probably using them for 23rd premium or an injured guy. That's probably where they're being reserved. So I'll remove those formats out. We'll stay on AFL Fantasy, whereas Rids will cover them all. When's that point in time of the year that in AFL Fantasy we hit unique and go against, or go and get a unique ourselves?
It's probably about the point where your team starts to be completed. And when I say complete, I'm talking about 22 players that you would happily have kind of from this week till the end of the season and not trade out at any point. And when you start to go unique, you need to start to go to players that are still good enough to be at the top of their line, but that have the matchups, the form, and almost most importantly, the ceiling to be able to take on other coaches. That's why someone like Jack Steele is very appealing. That's why someone like James Sicily is very appealing. These are players that have huge ceiling on their days. Potential for 150. You can combine that with the VC or C, and you're pretty confident that they're going to be top of the line. Whereas if you're trying to defend rank, and let's say you're ranked inside the top 100 in a particular format or top 10, and you just want to say, I'm very comfortable where I am, you want to start to go towards those low variance type players. Someone that we were talking about just before is Caleb Sarong. Very, very low variance player. Another very low variance player that isn't being talked about a huge amount is Noah Anderson. He's basically gone at 105 for his last 5 games, very consistently as well. You're not worried that he's going to drop an 80 on any given week, but you're not expecting him to give you a 140 in any given week. And those are the types of players that you, if you're wanting to take the game on, you try and avoid. So that's how you take it on. And
it's good.
When there's players that have that value associated with that potential ceiling and allows you to maybe fix another player on the other end that you're not as happy with, that's especially when you can start to go for those types of players. Because in AFL Fantasy, we're getting to the point where we're starting to do premium shuffling, which is fine. Because premium shuffling is exactly. And you're going for a player that might have a worse run to a player that has a better run. But look for the players that you're going to when you're making those moves, because you can get really creative this time of year.
Yeah, it's good. So, Rids, let's wrap up the episode talking about captains as the other way to create that scoring ceiling and scoring uniqueness. What's the approach coaches should be looking to do with their VCC? Because I know the easy answer is put it on the guys you think are the highest scorers, but strategically, how could we use these two decisions we make that do create separation in us?
I think the key, and I've seen a lot of people talking about this over the course of the journey. This is just how I do it. There's no right way or wrong way to do this, and luck will always play a role at some point in time. So what I try to do is eliminate bad luck and luck out of that. So whoever I think is the best captain option for the round is who I try to set up as my captain fallback. Then I look for a potential best ceiling guy versus as well as the matchup, before he plays. So that's my VC loophole. That's how I look at it. So if someone has a very friendly matchup and they've got a massive ceiling, but the biggest part that we miss with this, who is in form, MJ?
That's correct.
Because right now, if I talked about Adelaide Crows, and I'll just throw it out there, radio, we've got 2 captaincy, vice captaincy options week in, week out at this point in time in Rory Laird and Jordan Dawson.
Correct.
Yet in fantasy, one is very in form, one is not. Now, it's well and good to throw that VC option onto a Rory Laird because he does have the ceiling, and whether he's got the matchup or not is a week-to-week proposition.
Yeah.
But I would never have him as my fallback captain option in this form.
That makes sense.
Someone like a Dawson, however, I would comfortably have as a fallback captain option.
So let's put it on this week, for example. Like, let's put some skin in the game. So we've got the Crows playing Saturday night against the Giants. Let's say that's your fallback option. Maybe you want to look at there's only 2 Sunday games, so it's Richmond and West Coast. I know some might think Taranto's the fallback captain. Okay, we've had a bit of a chat about Taranto. I'm not so sure. And then Hawthorn and North Melbourne. It'd be a brave coach to have Sicily as the fallback captain, but...
Well, just on Taranto, he has the ability to have a pop score. There's no problems about that. And that matchup is as friendly as it can for him.
On paper it is, yeah.
On paper. Okay. So if he scores 130 this week, of course. No one's going to be surprised by that.
No, of course not.
It's just that I don't see that ceiling with that Richmond team at this point in time and their midfield mix. Okay. So that's the risk you're taking, having him as your fallback.
Yeah.
Now, look at North Melbourne and Hawthorn. You've got a Sicily, okay? He's got risk because North Melbourne did tag, as you said before, Tom Stewart. And it was only Tom Stewart's late junk that got him over the score that he did to.
Yeah.
So there is risk there. So let's move it back again, Adelaide and GWS.
Yep.
This is where I would be really looking at as that captaincy option.
The safety net. Yeah.
The safety net. Because I can see, a Dawson being quite okay in this game.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's no problems about that. But on the flip side, I can also see a GWS mid, whether it's a Cogs, whether it's a Kelly after a very bad, also being good in this game.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not just one way in this matchup.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are good options there, yeah? You have a look at Geelong and Essendon. If you're looking for someone who could potentially have a ceiling and a pop-out VC option, Tom Stewart might be a very good option.
Yeah.
How about on
Zach
the flip
Merritt?
side? Zach Merritt.
He's been
Irish.
unstoppable. Yep.
There's always that fear factor of O'Connor and tags, but we've seen so many discussions about tags this year and we haven't seen it eventuate on the Collingwood side.
And
the Geelong side, sorry.
And Merritt, a lot of people got hoping that went against him with this fixture, thought, Adelaide, Geelong, maybe we'll come back to it. He's proving that he's going to another level of scoring too.
Yeah, what did we see last week? We would have been 100% sold before that game that Ben Keys was going to go to Zach Merritt.
Yep.
Because, he didn't go anywhere near him, MJ.
No. Maybe when they were sitting on opposite interchange benches was the closest they got.
So something that everyone would have foresaw didn't happen. Yeah. Now, again, that's another discussion with tagging and everything else.
Sure.
The only thing that we can actually say with tags is the only team that I would be worried about right now is Hawthorn, because that's the one that's fresh last week. Not just McGuinness, though, but Nash as well.
Nash and
don't forget Tom Green only scored 69 last week.
In AF,
So there's danger there. So if you have a fallback, that's your safest captain option.
Yep.
Then you look for the games before it for the VC, because there's no good having a good VC option after. That doesn't work like that, yeah?
No, that's right.
So
it'll be popular. People will look at the Bulldogs this week. They'll look at a Goulden this week. There is some really nice early game options for us.
Yeah. But, Thursday night football hasn't really been fruitful for VC.
Not this year, it hasn't.
Recently,
no.
But Goulden was a very good option last week. I think Petrarca a couple of weeks ago went okay. But again, they're still only mid-120s. We're not looking at that real potential monster, VC pop.
No.
Yeah. No. So when you're looking at these vice captaincy and captaincy options, I think a really important thing that you said there, Rids, is look at the form of the player as well. But I think it's really important to look at the form of the team that they're coming against as well.
Correct.
Because matchup charts can still be deceiving. As good as they are, as good as DFS is as a site, it's not able to track everything that's happening, We now know that Carlton is one of the most restrictive midfield matchups in the competition. That's kind of come about with their resurgence of their midfield being as strong as they are. The best team in the competition, Collingwood, is now one of the least restrictive midfields.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking for that sort of a matchup, you want to target inside mids against Collingwood and probably not target inside mids against Carlton. So, You got the likes of Rosie and Butters. You're probably not touching them against Carlton, whereas someone like Brayshaw, who now has lost his partner in crime, which means he's probably going to take on increased responsibilities and playing at a relatively big ground where he knows how to spread against Collingwood. That's the type of player that you can really take a VC punt on, because despite how rough that matchup might be, there is the potential that he goes 150.
Yeah.
Another player who you might consider something like that is St. Kilda. They're playing against the Suns, who have just sacked their coach. They've got a replacement coach in, who we don't know what's going to happen. We've got a player who's just come back into amazing form in Jack Steele. If you want to take the crowd on and go really unique, we know that Jack Steele can do 150 as well. And it would not surprise me if he did it this week.
Yeah.
So that's the way you want to start looking at your VC shouts, because you just got to be able to. It's like when you're picking a player in the preseason, when you're trading in players during the year, there has to be a narrative as to why you're picking that player as your vice captain or your captain.
Yeah, some really good advice. You boys have been absolutely sensational, not just on this episode, but right throughout the preseason. MiniMonk, as always, a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to you, Rids. I didn't think we'd see you, but, mate, just sneaking in at the end there, doing some fine work. Appreciate you for all you've done this year and the years gone by, mate.
That's how I roll, mate.
Yeah, just getting it done. If you want to go and check out this podcast or any of the others, wherever you're streaming this one, you can go and check it out. If you want to become a supporter of the Coaches Panel, become a Patreon, a few dollars a month, get some access to exclusive other rewards. All the details for our Patreon community you can find in this podcast description. We hope you have a fantastic round and hope it goes exactly the way you like. And that if the carnage comes, well, let's hope it hits us all. Good news is it already has. Have a fantastic round of fantasy footy, and we'll chat to you next week for another strategy roundtable.